Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a pretty provocative blog post from the Appalachian Guerrilla. It argues for a huge shift in foreign policy, but not with data or white papers. No, it uses a powerful story. A story about a man, a bear, and a mysterious old king. So let's unpack this whole allegory together.
So the author doesn't start with, political theory or a bunch of statistics. Instead, they just drop us right into the middle of this tense, dramatic story. And this story becomes the frame for their entire argument.
You're really meant to feel that. The author wants to put you right there in the scene, to establish this immediate, almost visceral sense of tension and cold.
And then we meet the antagonist. This isn't just any hunt. It's a full-on confrontation with something massive and dangerous, surrounded by a group of men out in the dark.
Now this line is where it gets really interesting. In the story, it gets a laugh, and that laugh tells you everything. It sets this really cynical, brutal tone. It's like the rules of civilized conflict are being openly mocked before the fight even begins. The article then lays out this just grinding, brutal fight. A proxy, who the author calls the dumbest of them, gets sent in to do the dirty work. He's armed and patched up, all while he's inflicting and sustaining just horrific damage. This isn't a quick kill, it's a long, drawn-out war of exhaustion.
And just as the fight gets really bloody, the scene kind of expands. The author introduces two new powerful observers. There's an old man on a throne, and then across the water, a giant, who seems to be supplying the whole fight. This is where the story starts to become something more.
So as you've probably guessed by now, this entire story isn't just a story. It's an allegory for global politics. And now the author explicitly starts mapping each character to a real-world geopolitical player.
And here it is, the author's whole framework laid out. The giant grizzly bear represents Russia. The man fighting it is a proxy nation. The old man on the throne, that's the United Kingdom. And the powerful giant across the water is the United States of America.
So, using this allegory, the author builds their central thesis. This isn't just a story, it's a vehicle for a pretty sharp critique of current U.S. foreign policy and its historical alliances.
The author draws a really stark contrast. The giant, the U.S., is portrayed as powerful, rich, and secure. But the old man, the U.K., is depicted as insecure, scarred by history, and manipulative, allegedly keeping the world in chaos just for his own benefit.
So the crucial point the author is making is that this whole situation is driven by the UK's historical baggage. They point to old scars on the bear, a Union Jack stamped in its hide, and argue that America is adopting this uppity, weak mentality that just isn't a good look for the world's strongest country.
Okay, so based on this sharp critique, the article totally pivots. It moves from analyzing the grim present of the story to imagining a completely different path forward, one that, in the author's view, is much, much better. The author poses this direct and pretty provocative question. What if the entire confrontation had been avoided? What if, instead of listening to the old man, the giant had chosen cooperation over conflict with the bear?
And this slide outlines the specific benefits the author envisions. It's not just about avoiding war. It's about creating what they call a market for beauty, a world of trade, cultural exchange, and mutual prosperity. The author actually calls this potential alliance a no-brainer home run. But the piece doesn't end on that hopeful vision. It snaps right back to the grim reality of the story, concluding with a pretty stark prediction about the consequences of the current path.
You can really feel the pessimism here. The author is expressing this deep sense that this alternate, cooperative future, well, it may no longer be possible, that the conflict, in their view, might have already reached a point of no return.
The author really hammers home the scale of this missed opportunity by reminding us that Russia covers a massive chunk of the planet's landmass. They argue the current path isn't based on logic, but, in their direct words, on a stubborn refusal to, quote, cooperate with the Slavs, which they warn could lead to our greatest fears realized.
And then the article just concludes with these two stark Latin words. It's an ancient phrase famously spoken by the Gallic chieftain Brennus after he sacked Rome, and it carries a really heavy historical weight. Woe to the vanquished. Woe to the conquered. This is the author's final, chilling warning. It implies that in the end, there will be no mercy, no negotiation for the loser of this conflict. The outcome will be absolute.
You know, this whole piece is a powerful example of using a story to make a political argument. And it leaves us with a big question.
Does telling a story like this, with heroes and villains and metaphors, make a complex issue easier to understand and more persuasive, or does it just oversimplify reality and obscure the hard facts? That's definitely something to think about.